And welcome to today's webinar about managing a VOREC community grant. For those of you who haven't seen me before, I am Lauren of the emails. I'm one of the folks who's been emailing you about your VOREC community grants and the results. And so we're going to spend this hour today, everybody who's here on today's call has been invited to move forward with our compliance check. And so we're going to touch on that and then really discuss a lot of what happens next. What is going to happen after the compliance check so that everybody understands the process now and what you're going to need to go into the grant agreement process. And so we are recording today's meeting. And so we're going to continue to mute folks as they come in. You will have the option to unmute during this session or drop questions in the chat. You can feel free to turn your cameras off if you do not want to see yourself or you don't want to be there. So please feel free to do so. You will also be getting a copy of the slides and this recording at the end after this after this webinar is finished. And so today, just to give you that little check-in of like, where are we now? You're making your way through the VOREC Community Grant Program timeline. We started with the applications and we did the review and we have moved forward to the compliance checks and the grant agreement development phase. So this is going to be happening from now until May, that we're going to be really digging into this. And then project development is going to be starting somewhere around June 1st. So if your grant agreement gets signed before June 1st, you'll be able to start before then, but just go ahead and plan right now for June 1st to be the official start date. And so what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be doing just some quick introductions to be able to share. We're going to provide an overview of the grant agreement process. We're going to talk about like what is in that process and answer a lot of those questions that were shared in advance that folks had about like, well, what is this? What's included? How does reimbursement work? What are the reporting requirements for this grant? And so we want to tell you all this now as we go into that planning process. We'll talk about what the next steps are that are going to happen with this, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. And so I want to start by just saying congratulations for moving forward. This was a highly competitive grant round. We received 127 applications that all in all were asking for more than $21 million. We ended up being able to find a little bit of extra funding, but just over 6 million is what we've been able to move forward with. So know that like you all did, it was an amazingly competitive pool and like you all really impressed the review committee to move forward with this process. And so through this grant agreement this grant process, you're going to be working with several staff from the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. So there's myself, Lauren Pyle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm probably going to be one of your main contacts with this. So I manage the VOREC Community Grant Program, but I also support the Recreational Trails Program with my work with the with FPR. We also have Brian Carlson, who's actually here on the call today. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Brian, and yeah, you'll probably see lots of emails from me, and happy to be here. And I'm really excited about all your projects and really been thrilled to read about them. I just came on a few weeks ago, and so I'm getting introduced to all your projects now, and yeah, really thrilled to learn more about them and see them all come to fruition. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And so you'll get emails from both of us on a regular basis. And then occasionally we'll be tapping in Claire Polfus, who is the Recreation Programs Manager with FPR. So you'll be getting to see all of us. So we are the faces behind the emails. And while we know that we've been working with folks in various different settings, we do ask that for all grant-related communications, you please use our shared inbox, which is that anr.fprrecreationgrants@vermont.gov. So we do ask that you please use that because that's a way to say, like, Brian actually works part-time right now with FPR. And so, if you email Brian on Thursday and I'm answering the inbox on Friday, we can be able to stay up to date and get that back to you as quickly as possible. Or the same way, you've been emailing with me and then Brian can tag in right away. We can see the whole thread in the communication and help support you. So by streamlining that communications always to that shared inbox, that's really going to be the best way for us to be able to help you. Now, thinking forward, we're digging in. That's who we are. A lot of what's going to happen next is what we call the grant agreement process. And if you've never had a grant with FPR before, we want to just provide a high-level overview of what is a grant agreement. Really, for us, it is the official document that confirms you've got a grant. And beyond just that, it is the one-stop place for everything you need to know about the grant. It's going to be your scope of work, your budget, your reporting requirements, your reimbursement, all the compliance stuff. So it is a pretty extensive document, as you might imagine, but it's got everything in there. And it's going to be something that gets signed by an authorized representative of your organization. And so in many ways, it is a legal contract. It's what we've got. And so we're going into this process now of developing these grant agreements. And one of the questions we've had in the past is like, why does it take as much time as it does? Because, as you can see on the slide, there's a lot of steps. And that's really the biggest piece, is to know that we are working as fast as we can to get these out the door. And so you all submitted applications, they were scored, we did the ranking, they were approved by FPR's commissioner to move forward. We notified you that you've been invited to move forward, and then we're still collecting those compliance documents. So I know many of the people who are here on the call today have already submitted those. Our deadline for submission for the compliance documents is tomorrow. So if you haven't done that yet, please be sure to do so. And then from there, we are already actively checking through those compliance documents, both as our grants program team as well as our business office. And then all while this is happening, we dig into drafting those grant agreements. And I'm going to talk about that more. And then we send it to you and you get to look through it and double check it. Then it comes back to us for revisions. We have some other checks and balances internally. It goes on to our business office for their review as well as legal review. And then everybody signs it and project can get started. And so know that, like, coming into March here, we're in the middle of a really multi-step process. And so these grant agreements, what is in them? I hit on it at a high level. The big things are your scope of work. What are the reporting pieces? What are the purchasing and reimbursement requirements, and some compliance information? And so the grant agreements, I'm going to walk through that because a lot of the questions that we got in advance are covered in those grant agreements. So I'm just going to kind of walk through in that order. If at any point you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat or jot it down, and we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So we'll do verbal questions at the end. So please hold those until you get going. But if you do have something, feel free to drop it in the chat. And if I see it instantly, I'll try to get to it. Otherwise, we'll make sure we come back to it at the end. But so your grant agreements, right? Going back to those, we have them in two big parts. Part one is a form. It's a one-pager that has the kind of the boilerplate information of, how much is the grant for? What is the address? What is the financial pieces, in terms of the funding source, those sorts of pieces. The biggest thing that we're going to ask for you to check on the grant agreements is down actually at the bottom when we send it to you for the part ones. We want to see the contact information at the bottom should be your authorized representative for your organization, that person who has the legal authority to sign the document. So we're going to pre-fill in that information with what you put in the application. But if, say, that member was your select board chair and they stepped down as of town meeting day, or it was somebody else and they've changed their email address, please go ahead and just double check that information as we get going. And so what we're going to go forward with is the next piece is the part twos. And Matt, I see your question. I'm going to come back to that one in just a little bit, but I see it right there. Thank you. And the Part 2s are really the bigger, extensive piece of the grant agreement. And there's a lot of parts to them, and we're going to walk through that. So attachment A is one of the biggest things you need to pay attention to, because this is the scope of work. This is where we dig into, like, what are we going to require as the project components? What are the metrics that we're going to ask you to measure? What are the deliverables? And what are the other provisions that need to be there? Some of those core requirements. That's all in attachment A. And so the project components, you know, what we're doing behind the scenes is we're taking your applications and your work plans and trying to translate them into a brief bulleted list of the essential core components of what success for your project looks like. Like, when you do these things, you will be done. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to create that finite list. And we like to put numbers with it as much as possible, because we can say, yes, you're building a parking lot with 10 parking spaces. You're going to install 6 signs, 4 kiosks. And so we're going to try to pull that out. We might be asking you for some of that information if we didn't see it already in your application. And you might be saying, well, I'm not exactly sure. Is it going to be 8 spots or 10 spots in the parking lot? And so for that, we want to make sure that the language is written in a way that compensates for that. Because for this, we can say, you know, if we say it's a 10 spot piece, if you build a parking lot with 12 spaces, that's okay. You can always go above and beyond. You can't go less. And so not without a big conversation. So if we say the parking lot will be 10 spaces and you only build a parking lot with 8 spaces, that causes some challenges for us as a grantor and with our processes. And so with that, you know, we ask that folks maybe will do some clarifying words with that. So things like up to or at least. And so we'll see that there. So just to be watching out for that. And, you know, we'll also be defining metrics. These are the things we're going to be asking you to measure with this. And so some examples of metrics, and we'll be pulling these out of what you put into your proposal. There was actually a question of how will you measure success? And so these might be things like miles of trail, numbers of bridges, numbers of culverts. And we're going to just ask, you know, these are going to be the things that they're going to connect to that scope that we're going to ask you to report on at the end. For programming, it might be number of participants. We're going to look at how you said you were going to define success to pull those out. Purchasing. That was the next big bulk of questions. That is, again, part of our grant agreement, and it is included a bit in scope A or attachment A, that scope of work. And we do outline in this scenario for the procurement process. You really have to have a process that is efficient and cost effective, promotes fair and open competition, guards against favoritism, fraud, and corruption, and protects the public investment. If your organization already has something written, you can follow that if it does those pieces. So in terms of like how, if you're going out to bid, what do you need quotes on, all those pieces? If you have that, you can use that. If you don't have any written procurement processes or procedures, Vermont has something called Bulletin 3.5 that is what the state requires, and we just ask that you follow that if you don't already have something written that would kind of meet those qualifications. And we know that folks are excited to get ready now, but if you are in basically any track other than flood recovery, please wait. This is the purchasing piece, is that you have to wait until your grant agreement is executed to sign the contracts or make the purchases. So just know that it does say that in the attachment A's that you've got to wait. There's also a piece in there if your proposal included equipment. And so by equipment, I mean a single like item, like an excavator, like a truck, like a tractor, a single item that is valued at more than $5,000. If your proposal happened to include that, know that there are special provisions as related to that. The state requires that, you know, that equipment item needs to be only used for the purposes of the grant. It can't be like, well, this is our opportunity to buy this item and we're going to use it for all these other things while we happen to buy it. it doesn't work that way in terms of the protection of the investment. And so it only is allowed to be used for the grant work. And that includes even after the grant end date through the usable life of that item. And there's usually some extra reporting pieces. So if your proposal did include equipment, that's not everybody. You know, this is not, say, we're buying $6,000 worth of gravel, because that's more, you know, a bit of a supplies piece, or we're buying a bridge. What we want to say is it's really those tools is really what trips that as a big piece. And so if your proposal does include that, know that we will be following up with you individually to chat through what the requirements are, because it looks a little bit different item to item. Financial documentation. This is kind of the next piece that was there, and that you have to keep financial documentation on file. And there are really three bulk pieces of financial documentation. What did you spend the money on? How did it get paid? And anything you didn't spend money on. And we have a whole list of things that, like, these are things that you should keep on file as a grantee. So things like invoices, receipts, labor reports, timesheets, pay stubs, you know, if you have in-kind donations, we got to get a written documentation. You should have that on file. So these are just as the best practice of things to keep on file. And we did have some pieces that came up where people were maybe debating. We've even talked with some folks about staff versus contractors, of like, who should we be using for this? And so both are allowed for VOREC community grant work, but the documentation is different. So just want to tell you. And so if you're using, say, a contractor for the work, you need to get those competitive quotes, and then you'll have the invoices on file. And if you're using staff, the things that we're generally looking for are a labor report, you know, what did they do? And then the timesheet of how much did they do. Are kind of the pieces. And so just know that as you're thinking about planning for managing your grant, that there are some different financial requirements with that. We also have reporting included in that, in the document. And so with the reports, there are some different measures. You know, we have a progress report, which you're going to do periodically through the grant. You're going to do this every time you want to ask us for money, and really annually at minimum, because we do know that some folks either ask for reimbursement on an annual basis, or we even have some grantees, depending on the size and the scope of their grant, that maybe want to wait to the end to reimburse everything. But the progress report tells us, you know, we're going to ask you pieces about, like, how's it going? How far have you done? What challenges have you encountered? Is this piece complete? We're going to ask kind of information like that. And there will be an online form that you'll submit that to. So we're currently in the process of revising that form based on some feedback from previous year's grantees. And so we will send you, as soon as it's ready, I will send you a Microsoft Word preview version of it, because it's one of those fun pieces about Microsoft Forms is that once you get started, you really can't stop and go back. And so we'll send you a Microsoft Word version preview so that you can draft it all and then go enter it all in once to the form. And so you'll do the progress reports then. And then at the very end, we'll have a final report. And with that final report, we're going to need the progress report again of, like, whatever that final period is. We're going to ask for documentation of any physical deliverables. So things like photos of the before and after, you know, whether it's if you're building anything. If it was a program, we often ask for photos of something there. If you made anything that is a digital deliverable, like you paid somebody to design a map, or you built a website, or anything like that, we're going to ask for, like, links or PDFs as related to that. And we're going to be asking for those reports on your final metrics in the final report. And all of this is going to be outlined for your specific project in your grant agreement. And so it's hard because here on the call, we have folks who have everything from construction projects to programming to marketing to capacity building. And those all look different. So it's hard to give universal examples, but we're going to make sure that these final pieces in terms of what are the deliverables, what are those measurables, relate very specifically to your project. And I see the question about reimbursements in the chat, because that's where we're going through of the next attachment is all about the payment provisions. And so just as a reminder, this is a reimbursement grant. And so with that grant, what is in your grant agreement is what we can reimburse. And if you end up going over that budget, we can't increase the value of your grant at all. And so know that like what we have allocated for the award is the maximum amount that we can give you. If you end up coming in under budget, like that's a conversation we can have, but know that we can't ever increase that. And so we have built in, this is actually says this in the grant agreements, in the payment provisions, is that we've built some flexibility into the budgets. Because what we're going to do is reframe the budgets so that instead of being those itemized detailed lists that you put in, thank you very much, the ranking committee love to see those in your applications. We're going to zoom out and group them more by project components so that all the costs are associated with, say, this trail building work or this trail improvement work are lumped together, and all the costs for your marketing work are lumped together, and all the costs for your supplies and equipment are lumped together. We're going to put those together in your budgets, in your grant agreements. And then from there, the way the payment provisions are written in attachment B, we've built you into about a 25% flexibility per line item. And so what this is done, for example, if your budget says that you have $10,000 budgeted for a certain youth program, 10% of that, right, is $2,500. And so looking within your whole budget, if you really spend $11,552 on that youth program, you don't need to talk to us about it. It's within the 25% buffer. You're great. But if it becomes $12,500 or more, that's when we have to talk about a budget amendment. So, but your grant agreement does actually specify that you've got some flexibility to really adjust to real-time costs. And the reimbursements. I know that's the thing on everybody's mind. You saw that with the progress reports, is like, how does reimbursement work? And so for us, reimbursement can happen as frequently as once every 3 months. And every time you submit for reimbursement, what we'll need is an invoice to FPR with the amount that's being reimbursed. And this is all going to be in your grant agreement. You're going to get this all by email afterwards. We're going to give you probably an itemized reimbursement spreadsheet to fill out. We'll need a progress report. And then you're going to need some additional information depending on your final risk assessment. And so this is going to look different grant to grant across everybody. And so you can do this as frequently as once every 3 months. And know that like once you submit it to us, we're generally sitting at about 4 to 6 weeks to have it go through all the stops within FPR, because it comes to us, then it goes to the business office, and then it goes to the check people, and then it goes to the mail, and then it goes through USPS to you. And so we get it going as quickly as we can. And that piece is often 4 to 6 weeks, but you can do it as frequently as 3 months. With that, that is the piece. If there is like a one-time special expense that is outside of that 3-month window, please talk to us and to see. We know cash flow is a piece for small towns and nonprofits. So please, and our small businesses or in the outdoor equity track. So please talk to us about that. But without those special occasions, like please plan for it to be once every 3 months, just because of the volume that are coming through, that's going to be about our capacity. Plus, remember, every time you submit for reimbursement, you've got to report. And so to answer Michelle's question in the past, in the chat, you do submit those progress reports if and when you're invoicing, or annually at the minimum basis. So if you decide you're not going to ask for reimbursement until the very end, we'll want to see that in between. And so that final bullet was there. Oh, thank you, Eve, for clarifying. It does say quarterly in the grant agreement draft, and that just means once every 3 months. So we don't have specific windows that you have to hit within necessarily. We have a time period, generally it's in mid-June, that we can't do any more in June, just because that's the closeout of our year. But say if you invoiced in August, the next one could be 3 months later. So we don't say, oh, it's only September to December and it's only these months. It's just 3 months between them. And so the final piece for those reimbursements really is determined by your risk assessment. As I said, we need the FPR invoice, the progress report, the reimbursement sheet, and the rest is going to be determined by the risk assessments. And we're already doing this right now. Like when you get to see your first draft grant agreement, it will be in there. We'll be able to have that. And the way the business office determines risk is determined by the dollar value of the grant, the project complexity, and the questionnaire that you all submitted or are in the process of submitting. And so they're going to determine through their processes and their review what they call low, medium, and high risk. And really what this means is just the level of documentation you have to give us up front. As I said at the beginning, you should keep all of your financial documentation on file for you at all times. And so it's available on request. And so if you are ending up being determined a low risk grant, generally you're just going to keep that on file and give us the other stuff. Versus say on the opposite end of the spectrum, those higher risk grants, we're going to ask for all that financial documentation every time you reimburse. And that's just like part of the state protections because it's public money and they're just trying to have that oversight. And so just know that those three things are all coming into play once they're making that determination, and we'll be sure to let you know. The other thing in the grant agreement I want to highlight for you is going to be, it's generally attachment E, and that is the budget. As I mentioned earlier, it's going to be blocked by categories based on your project work components. So we're going to block those out for you so you can see it. And part of the reason we do it this way, you're like, but I already did all the work the other way, right? Like part of the reason we do it this way though, is to give you flexibility long-term to figure out how to implement if things have changed. You know, like when you go down the road, now that you've seen the financial documentation, if you're like, actually, we want to contract that versus using staff time, or vice versa, we want to use staff time instead of contracting it, you can make that decision because we're just saying it's this many dollars to do the things. So we've got that. And the other piece for it, you know, is sometimes we'll include multiple buckets in a thing. So say if you have a budget line for design and implementation, what we want to see is we want to give you the flexibility to say, like, you thought that your design costs were going to be $5,000 out of this whole $10,000 budget. $5,000 that was going to be design and $6,000 or $5,000 was going to be supplies. What if your design budget comes in under budget? You find somebody who can do that for $3,000. Great. You can buy more Stein stuff. You can buy more supplies. You can reallocate that and still get the work done. And so we can do that based on those deliverables. And so we do it that way. But the ineligible expenses are still the same. And so with that, there are things like anything that's not in your scope of work or doesn't have appropriate documentation is not going to be allowed. So this is going to be the space of like, if you're planning to buy certain items, we want to make sure that that is included. And I'm not talking about itemizing pom-poms. Yes, in my previous slide, I had to itemize pom-poms for kids' arts and crafts for a $400,000 grant. It was really lovely. We're not making you do that. And so instead, we're trying to say like, supplies for the event. We're going to have those in big buckets. But you can't say, well, we're going to do only this with we had called it out that we weren't going to have any supplies and now we want to buy supplies. Like we need to have it at least in the scope somewhere for it to be included, because we're going to be checking on the back end to make sure that everything that you're asking for reimbursement for is a part of this project. And it's got to have that right documentation. The other thing that if your proposal include this, we tried to call it out already, but want to just say that again, is that these grants do not permit any cash payments to individuals. So things like stipends, transportation credits, scholarships, direct cash payments for participation to general participants are not allowed through this program. In the same way, you can't just decide to subgrant out a whole bunch of your award, say if you have a coalition of partners, unless it's included in the scope. So if it is already written in, you'll be good, but you can't just say, oh, we're going to do a mini grant program now. It's not allowed. It's not a part of this grant. The other pieces that I want to just call to attention is that, like, if it was ineligible for your track when you applied, as described in the application guidance, it's still not going to be allowed. Anything that's for work that's happening before the grant agreement is signed, with the exception of our flood recovery grants, because they are the only ones that were allowed to start as early as July 11th. Those will be a piece. If it's already been done, it's not reimbursable. And the administrative costs, if those were something you included in your original budget, they're still going to be included as a line item in your budget. But those are capped at 10%. We also have a dollar value threshold for the larger value grants. And so if that's you, we will be sure to let you know. And with that, there's a few other pieces that are coming in. We've got these other attachments that are going to be a part of the document that you see. So there's going to be this attachment C, which is the standard state provisions for contracts and grants. Please read this. This is the core compliance information. And when you all sign this, you're agreeing to follow those. So please read those. We're also going to be putting in your project map and your landowner permissions as a part of that if you have a construction project. If you own your land in full and you were one of those people who took that 2-sentence piece to put into the application, it won't be in there. But for any work that's happening that is construction and maintenance on property that is not owned by any grantees, we'll be including those. And then we also have in the final attachment a standard list of guidelines for recreation assets. And so I want to highlight that because it's been one of the things we've actually seen over the years. It shows up more in any construction projects, but projects who are following the standard guidelines, whether that is for mountain biking or for hiking or snowmobiling or signage, we're actually finding that in the face of all the things that are happening is that those trails, those resources that are being following those standards hold up better. They're the ones that are not being replaced as much, which is why we point to them, because this is going to protect your project to have the longest term impact going forward. And so it's a whole bunch of links. You'll get it. You'll be able to see it, but know that it's there. So I'm actually going to go back to the other slide and pause, because I see some questions coming in the chat. So starting work in June, say the first invoice September 1st and every 3 months. Yes. Because you can't do any pre-award work unless you're flood recovery. September is generally when we're going to start to see the first invoices come in. If you're flood recovery and you already have expenses, basically once your grant agreement is signed, we'll be able to start that reimbursement process for any pre-existing work. And for when submitting reimbursement, to include receipts or records for match. The match receipts are generally going to be ones that you just keep on file for you. If we're ever asked if the program is ever audited, we might have to ask for those, but generally we don't need for this grant because match is not a requirement of this grant in general. There might be a few cases where we want to see something else, like if that match is essential to the function. I know there's a project here that is a bridge that we're funding a portion of the bridge. And so we'll probably want to see that like the whole bridge is happening, not just the tiny little piece that we're funding, because it's essential to the success of the project. But in general, if you had volunteer labor, if you had donated stone or something like that, if it's not included in your budget, you should just keep that documentation on file for you. Okay. Because I'm going over all of this now, and I know it's a lot because we want to get it right the first time. We really want to get this dialed in so that you all have as clear a roadmap knowing what you're going to do and what success is going to look like, so that as soon as your grant agreement is signed, you are ready to roll and everything is set and you can just follow it and make it happen. Because we do recognize that things change. And so we do have a process called the amendment process that addresses that. But I want you to know in advance that it's work. And that there are a process to it. And so things that we can amend grants for, part way through, might be things and changes like budget allocation, the end date. We have given some extensions in a limited capacity before to grants, or changes to the scope of work. Those are the things that we can amend. We can't ever amend the grant to give you more money, just because we've already allocated everything that we've got. And so those are the things we can amend for. And generally, when we do an amendment, there are things that have to happen to do that. You know, some examples from the past would be things like state or national level significant events. These are the things like if you've ever signed an agreement with a force majeure clause that would be qualified in that, you know, the things that none of us are responsible for, but all of us are dealing with. And so recent examples included the pandemic, right? Like when that happened, those grants got an extension because work paused for a year. The flooding events of last year happened. We have grantees who had plans to go, and then all of a sudden they can't find the contractors to do the work because all of those contractors are booked doing flood recovery. And so it changed, right? It was this huge significant piece. We've also had grants in the past that were ones where maybe there was a two-phase process where there was some planning and some implementation as related to that. And so, you know, maybe they were doing the permit investigations or they were doing this final drawing plan or whatnot. And so some of that depends track by track. But if you ever get a result that says, do not do the next thing, please don't do the next thing. Like, please come talk to us. We've had a grantee in the past where like their initial design where they're like, we're ready. And they said, absolutely not. That's not feasible. It's a, you know, you'll never be able to use it as a public structure. And so we're like, oh, then please don't use that as a public structure. But what can we, you know, we worked with that grantee to say, well, what could you do instead of, you know, retrofitting this building to be a welcome center? We're working with that grantee to see like, what else could you do that fulfills like the value of a welcome center without actually retrofitting the building? Like, what else could we do? And if there are any other documented kind of substantial changes from when the grant agreement is signed to when the challenge is identified, those are things that generally trigger an amendment. But amendments are something we use very judiciously. As I mentioned at the beginning, this was a highly competitive grant process, and you all were picked to move forward because of the strength of your projects, because of the impact the ranking and review committees could see on your communities. There was really big, this piece. And so because of that, and because of the number of other projects that weren't advanced, in part because we just didn't have enough money to fund all the really great work. We really want you to stick with your original plans. This is not going to be the opportunity to like, well, we thought we were going to do this and now for something completely different. You know, we really want to stick to the original spirit of the grant with that. Because the amendment process, you know, it is similar to the grant agreement process and that there's a lot of steps along the way. You know, if something happens, like, please reach out to us for a conversation and we'll tell you, yes, that might be an amendment, or no, it's not. You know, there are times when people are like, is this enough of a budget change? If you're not sure, like, please feel free to reach out once you get into it. But generally, if it is, we're going to ask you to collect things. We need documentation. We'll need a write-up. We'll need some other stuff. And then it goes through our multiple step process that all has to get signed. And so with that, you know, really the question is, what happens next? What do you do right now? And so for the first piece, please wait to get started. You know, and if you're not the flood recovery, please continue to wait. I know everyone is really excited to get this work going, but please wait for it as best you can. We're going to be sending emails out, so just watch for it. We have 2 emails that we know are going to be coming pretty quickly. You know, we are working through those compliance checks as quickly as we can. As I said, there's 51 of them coming through, and so for our team, and then it goes to our business office team. You know, we're working as fast as we can, so we're going to let you know that as soon as we can. And then after that happens, it'll probably be a couple weeks. Depends on, we're going to get them going as fast as we can. It might be more like a month for some. We're going to be sending draft agreements. And when you get your draft grant agreement, please read that through. That's going to be our attempt at synthesizing your whole proposal. And we want to make sure that our read of your project actually fits with your intent. So please do that. If you have any changes, please mark them using like a track changes or comments or something like that, something that makes it really, really obvious for us. So the other piece that we've been hearing a lot about is that people are ready to shout this to the world, right? That you've moved forward, that this is an opportunity. So we are going to be in touch with you as soon as you cleared the compliance check. As I mentioned to many people in your initial email, we are planning a press release. We're actually coordinating to see if there are some other promotions that we can do. And as soon as we have dates and things ready, I will email you, because we want to be able to either, if we're having some sort of event, invite you. We want you to be a part of that, to be able to celebrate it. If you're trying to time your own communications and you want to piggyback off of ours, we want to support you in that way. So I will be sending that information out as soon as we've got it dialed in. But we're working our way through those compliance checks as quickly as we can. Coming back, there are sort of two other big logistical pieces to do for next steps. One is permitting. And so this was in the emails, other pieces. If you have not reached out to the DEC folks identified in your permit navigator reports, if you're doing any kind of a construction project, please do that. They might say, no, you don't need a permit, in which case that's what you needed to do, was to confirm it with them that you don't need a permit. But just doing the permit navigator report is not a permit. So you need to follow up with DEC, because they might say, actually, yes, you do need to do that, or you need to do this kind of survey or something like that. And so this is work you can be doing now, is like that initial investigating of like, do we need it? Do we not need it? If you already know you need it and you're like, we've got it budgeted, we're going to do the wetland survey, it's happening. Wait till your grant agreement is signed to actually do the wetland survey. So this is the phase of like, do we need it? Do we not need it? But know that no matter what, if you do need some kind of permit, and just because you own the land doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need a permit, or just because it's zoned in put in a certain location. These are the state level permits generally that we're looking at, things like wetlands and stormwater and those sorts of things. Just know that the permitting process, if you do need a permit, generally takes time. And like per compliance requirements, you are not allowed to start any construction until you have the permit. So just to think about that now in terms of your timeline. So you're not allowed to start construction. If you're a programming grant, a capacity building grant, a planning only grant, this is not something you have to worry about, because you're generally doing one of those things of like this investigative phase. But if you are a construction project that you're planning to build or maintain or repair or replace, that is something that we want to make sure you follow through on. The other piece, Matt, coming back to your question from the very beginning at the chat, of landowner permissions. This is a thing, like we didn't ask for them by tomorrow. That wasn't a piece. We didn't ask for them by tomorrow. We wanted things like your certificate of insurance, your Act 154, certificate of good standing, the risk assessment, and that fourth piece of paper that is in the email for you. But the landowner permissions, if you already submitted a landowner permission, like using one of our forms in your applications, you're probably set. We'll follow up with you if that's not the case. But if you did not already have signed landowner permission that meets our requirements, please start seeking that now. We know that that's often a conversation with landowners that you need to do. And so we have those forms posted on our website. And just to reiterate, with that piece is that I will be sending out these slides, including all these links to you afterwards. The last piece before I come to these additional questions that are here in the chat is that we ask you to stay in touch through this process. We're going to be reaching out to you. And if we send you an email asking for something, it's because we can't move forward until we get a response. And even if your response is, yes, this looks great, that is a response that we need. And so just know that if we send that out, we do generally need that response. And in many ways, the faster you can get that response to us, the faster your process moves forward. And so you can you can help us move these forward. But the flip side of that is that we are working as fast as we can behind the scenes. So if you haven't heard from us, there's no need to worry that we forgot about you. There really isn't. And so if you just say, you don't have to check in with us, you don't say, is it coming yet? Like, we are working as furiously and quickly as we can. And things will happen on a rolling basis just based on our capacity. And so there's no need to check in of like, is it ready yet? Because as soon as it is, we will let you know, for sure. And again, that shared email, that anr.fprrecreationgrants@vermont.gov is the best place to reach us. So from here, in our final 15 minutes together, we want to open it up for Q&A. This questions and the answers of things that we haven't gotten to talk through yet. I'm going to scroll back up through the chat and go to those first. And then after we get through those, if anybody has any questions, you can continue to put them in the chat, or you'll have an opportunity to unmute and go from there. And so I'll go ahead and take the first one that I'm seeing that we haven't gotten to. For multiple line items, I see one that involve partners, like fishing trips, state park trips, something like that. If we can't do one, say the fishing trips, could we do another trip if the cost changes less than the percentage? It will depend on how we do your grant agreement. So as I said, we will look at, for this question from Lori, thank you very much. We will look at your grant agreement and we'll try to put things into buckets together into logical packets. So if like the bucket is programming for a certain audience or in a certain geographic area or a certain type of activity, like if fishing trip A doesn't work out, but fishing trip B does, if it's the fishing programs, that's fine. If you do 3 fishing programs instead of 2 fishing programs, so long as it works within your scope, it'll be fine. So it'll be depending on how it's written. And if you have concerns, like when your grant agreement is written, to you're like, I actually don't know if we can do this, like that's the opportunity to talk with us, to say like, can we actually rework this another way? Because I think this is something that we're worried about or that we're concerned about in that way. Because if it is shifting outside of the scope or outside of the budget, that's where the amendment conversation comes in. All right, the next question I see in the chat looks like it's from Andy. Proposal includes a partner that was selected from a previous as part of competitive bidding process. So if you have a designated partner, if they are listed in the scope, that is something that is separate from a competitive bid process. If you already have somebody that you have been through a competitive bid process, it just didn't happen like during this moment. That is also generally okay if you're following those written procurement processes that are fair and open and all those pieces. So we just ask that you wait to sign the contract till you get the agreement, is really the biggest piece, until the agreement is signed, because that's really that, if you're using, or if you're planning to use your VOREC grant funds, that the grant is in place before you sign the contract. Next question I see from Simone, at what point do you need select board approval acceptance of the grant? It is at the end at execution. If you have a select board chair or someone who is a part of your authorized representative who has really great perspective and feedback, please have them read your draft. That would be great. If it is the piece of like they could provide feedback to help advise, then it's great to get their perspective during the draft phase. But we only need the signature at the very end. So it just depends on how your organization, your town, your community is set up and who that person is in relation to you. That's the piece that we've noticed that from the project managers and the authorized representatives is sometimes like they're the same people. Sometimes the authorized representative is actually probably the person who's here today on the webinar. Sometimes it's the program manager. So there's no universal answer, but like at the very end, when we sign things is really when it needs to. And when we send you the draft for review, like please don't sign it, because it goes back to us. We put all the things together in one pretty PDF, and then it gets sent to you via DocuSign. And so that's the piece, is like, we will send it to you by DocuSign when it's ready to go. If it's not in DocuSign, it's just for your review. All right. Rick, I owe you an email, because that was actually going to be my question, is that you and I are going to connect one-to-one about that. Fabulous. And Ellen, what is the process for getting an extension if one is needed? That is the full amendment process. So thank you for asking that. So if you're getting to the end of your project and you're realizing you need more time, once you realize that, please reach out to us. But we're probably going to go through that full amendment process. We're going to look for like what has changed between when the grant agreement is signed and where we are in that process. If you reach out to us in August, if we just signed your agreement in May, we're going to say, no, not yet. It's too soon to actually know that we need an extension unless something like significant and huge has happened. It's too soon for that. But if we have those pieces in play, if we're having that conversation, that's what we'll need. But generally, we know that there are projects that are ambitious, that were included. You have roughly 18 months from when the grant agreements are signed to the end final date on December 31st, 2025. And so this is also the piece, like, as we're going through the grant agreement development process, if you're like, this is actually unrealistic for us, like, we can't actually achieve this in 18 months, please have us that conversation. Please have that conversation with us and to get that checked in. But on the whole, the extension process is truly, it is an amendment to do that. And so we'll go through that whole process. Andrew, asking for extensions on the compliance documents. I would love to connect with you one-to-one to know what the challenge is. If there are certain pieces we could get in advance and certain pieces there aren't. We know that things are coming up with insurance companies who you're like, we've asked them and they're not sending it. So please talk to us if that's the case. I'll wait, and maybe we can connect at the end of this after the recording is done, or through email afterwards. But we're trying to get it all together because we really want you all to be able to start on that June 1st date or before, if your grant agreement gets signed before. And if we continue to push out things like the compliance documentation, it just delays the whole process, and we don't want to do that for you. So if there's a piece that we're missing, we can do that. If you have a special circumstance, like something has happened that's a unique circumstance, please let us know. With that, I think I've gotten all the questions in the chat. What other questions do you have? You can unmute doing that, or you can address those questions into the chat. Claire, I see your raised hand.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Pulvis. I'm the Recreation Program Manager, and I work with Lauren and Brian on supporting these grants. I just wanted to mention with the question about select board approval. Once we get the compliance documentation all set and we're working on grant agreements, if you need your select board to approve like that you are going forward with this grant, the different towns have different approval processes. That's when you should do that, because that's when we are assuming you will sign the grant. So if there's anything that you haven't done yet with your town that would say like that the select board needs to approve a different part of the process, I think that is like when you would want to go to them and get that voted approval if you haven't done that yet. And then, as Lauren said, then it's at the end, whoever is the authorized representative for your town can sign it, and it's different for every town. So like that's what we work with you on. But if you had like, just as a like, don't wait till the end and then have your select board say, hey, actually, we don't want to do this anymore. So whether it's keeping in touch with them or needing to get like an actual approval, please do that once we make sure that your risk assessments and all your compliance documentation is set, which should be in the next couple weeks.
Thank you very much, Claire, for that clarification. Really appreciate that. Do we have other questions? I see another one in the chat of, can you begin the procurement process before signing the grant? If in terms of like putting things out for bid, other pieces, like it all depends on like your individual organizations or town's policies and procedures. Please do not sign any contracts before the grant agreement is done. But if you're like, we're going to put together the RFP and circulate it out to the universe. If you're not using any paid staff time that would be a part of that, that's being covered by the grant, like that is something you could move forward with, is like putting it out for bid, but just don't actually sign the contract to make it happen until the grant agreement is signed as a piece. But if you're trying to reach out to contractors, get updated estimates, like those sorts of pieces, you could do that, but like don't purchase anything. Like this is not like go to Amazon and get all the, or go to your outdoor gear builders or whoever it is to buy all those things that were on your wish list for the equipment for your grant. So please wait on those, but it's those other pieces that you can move forward with the conversations. Any other questions? Stan, I see the hand. We can't hear you. No, I can't hear you. I'm sorry, we can't hear you at all. No, if you can try it in the chat maybe, and we can do it that way. I think I see a hand from Nick.
Oh, there's muted. Yeah, just a quick one for flood recovery recipients. Should we sort of begin knowing that a lot of us have sort of a backlog of expenses that could be reimbursed, presumably kind of right out of the gate, and then other work that's pending? Just any advice you have in terms of thinking about there's this 3-month window we need to put between things, but should we sort of essentially begin putting our ducks in a row now, wait until we have the final guidance on, I mean, I think we kind of have the guidance on what's necessary as you've laid out here, but just like thinking of that, since we have this, some of us, I think, and many of us probably have that mix of like, oh, stuff we already paid for last year, and then some things that are pending until the grant's actually executed.
Yeah, for our flood recovery grantees, we do have folks who have a mix of like past and future work. And so we are fully anticipating that shortly after grant agreements are executed, that we will probably get a round of reimbursement requests for that past work that's already happened. And then 3 months from whenever that comes in to start get the first reimbursements for future work. So that means like that's something we're fully expecting. We're not going to have reimbursement forms. You know, you won't know exactly what documentation you need to give us until that grant agreement is done. So in terms of like how much prep work to do, you'll have to wait for the grant agreement for that. But just know that like we are fully anticipating to do some as quick as we can turnarounds on those reimbursements as soon as grant agreements are executed for those flood recovery grantees, for that very reason, knowing that like sometimes some of these expenses were from July of last year. And so we want to get those as best we can. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I'm just assuming too, like if there's projects that are pending in the flood recovery track, could the wheels start moving on those, even though for, you know, there's work that hasn't yet been done? I presume, like knowing that the expenses are retroactive to July, like similar to these projects that haven't yet started, those could start and would still be covered.
Yes, they would, because flood recovery is one that like I'll say it's different from every other track, right? Like we actually were able to get a different set of funds specifically to support the flood recovery grants. With that, some of those projects were for work in July, August, September. We have projects that were like when the proposal was put in, those projects were happening in March. And so when they were reviewed, all of those were, you know, if they were termed eligible, they were eligible. And so yes, flood recovery is the one track that can move forward on a lot of those things. So I'm seeing a couple questions coming in the chat because I got the thumbs up there about the amount awarded was sent via email. If that is something that you don't have, because we haven't actually sent anybody amounts awarded, right? Like no one has gotten the amount awarded. You've been sent the amount you've been able to move forward with in the compliance check. Once we you know, really the award notification will come after that compliance check is complete. And so if you do not have that information, Erica, if you could drop the name of your organization in the chat or like send it to us via email privately, we'd be happy to resend that to you. Because we know that there are people moving in and out of the project manager or administrator roles. How many grants were awarded in total? We have 51 that have been selected to move forward with the compliance check. So 51 that are moving forward. So we're working through, you know, every one of you had to submit those 4 pieces of documentation. We're working through all 4 of those for all 51 of you to double check that, as well as passing that on to our business office for that. The next question I see is the authorized representative always the select board chair? No. That's the thing is like whoever is authorized for your organization or entity, it looks different place to place. So for nonprofits, sometimes this is an executive director, sometimes it's the projects manager, sometimes it's the programs manager. For towns, sometimes it's the select board chair, sometimes it's the town manager, sometimes it's the grant manager, sometimes it's the town administrator. It really depends on your organization and like who has that authority within your organization to sign what is that legal document for that. If any of the selected projects are unable to go forward, could those be redistributed? That's a great question, and one that I'm honestly going to be surprised if it happens. So if it happens, I'm sure our program team would have that conversation of like, what can we do? What can we look at? But I do know that we also were not able to advance $15 million worth of projects. And so that is a piece. It's like there were $15 million of projects that didn't move forward. And in many cases, it wasn't because they were poor projects. It was just because it's a highly competitive grant round. And so we were looking at things that were all outlined. And if by we, I don't actually mean me. The way the scoring worked is that we had this multiple rounds of review. So the very first round was a set of scoring. Every application was scored by 3 people. So at least one of those was specially recruited for their skills. That if you were on our listserv, you may have seen our open call to participate. We had people who volunteered and self-nominated to help participate and guide this process. And they shared some information about their skills and their expertise. And we tried to match them to proposals. So every proposal was scored by 3 different people using a rubric that is very similar to what you saw in the application guidance. Like that was the criteria that they were looking for. Really, I think the biggest things that we pointed to afterwards were like, if it's a 0 to 20, what does a 20 look like? And what does a 10 look like? So that we could all be on the same page. Because I've been part of scoring processes in the past where like, I loved it, it was a 10. And I loved it, it was a 20. And we're like, no, I loved it as a 20. Like, let's just all be clear, as I loved it as the 20. And so they were all scored by 3 people. All of the scores were then averaged, put together in a rank order piece that went to a track specific committee. That track specific committee then reviewed the pieces, the proposals in that scored order. And we also looked for things like, was there certain proposals that had high variability? In certain tracks, we had proposals that like maybe 2 of the scores gave them like a 98 out of 100. And one of the scores gave them a 35. Like if that happened, the ranking committee dove into that proposal to be like, why? Why did that happen? Is this proposal where it should be in the order? That was a piece that was a conversation that came up. They also looked at things like recommendations from partial funding that came from the scorers. So that was a piece that they confirmed and really affirmed that piece of who was going to be potentially moving forward. And then in the final committee, we had a third step, again, of our ranking committee members that came together, and they really zoomed out and looked across every track for things like geographic distribution. They were looking at things like project type. They were looking at, because we wanted to make sure that like somehow we didn't accidentally only fund one track, right? Like we had 4 tracks. We wanted to make sure that was there. And so they did reevaluate some of those pieces there to have that final recommendation that move forward. And so it was a really thorough and complex review process. I think all in all, we had about 25 different people involved in different steps along the way. So know that like your application getting to where it is that like cumulative affirmation of and selection from those people in that process. And so with that, we are over time. I want to go ahead and be respectful for your time. If you do have other questions that come up, please feel free to reach out to us at our email at anr.fprrecreationgrants@vermont.gov. We will be sending out this recording and the slides afterwards, but then just be on the lookout for emails from us from next steps. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.